This is a production of the WWDNYK Studios. No children or animals were harmed in the production of this podcast. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Dr. James Lyons Weiler, coming to you live from the WWDNYK Studios in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. Today we're going to be addressing fact-checking, specifically of a study that I designed, a study that I conducted the data analysis of with Dr. Paul Thomas. Let's see, I awoke this morning to messages from people telling me that they were receiving a notification on Facebook that the study on vaccinated and unvaccinated children used a dubious metric for comparing disease incidence in both groups. Health feedback. So we're going to take our time with this. I have it queued up, and I'm going to be going over this point by point and rebutting each and every one of the false claims that are made about this. And we'll begin now. So on healthfeedback.org, the title of the resource that is cited by Facebook and relied upon by Facebook that issues a verdict of unsupported for the findings in our studies is study on vaccinated and unvaccinated children used a dubious metric for comparing disease incidence in both groups. First of all, we didn't study disease incidence. In the title itself, they say disease incidence. We studied the relative incidence of office visits. That's in our title. We looked at the number of times that people who are vaccinated, kids who are vaccinated in this pediatric practice, had to go to the doctor for treatment related to diagnoses of asthma, anemia, these kinds of things. That's not incidence. So, Facebook fact checker, this is a message for you. First and foremost, you can tell by the title that this thing is way off base. It doesn't understand what we did. These people don't understand what they did, and we're going to talk about Flora Teo, the science editor, in a moment, and her background. She wrote the article. She doesn't have the background to understand what we did, and I understand that. I'm sure she's very good at what she does. The source they cite is Children's Health Defense, rather than linked to the original article. So Children's Health Defense and Collective Evolution, November 22 resource. I'll be bringing up my article to show you the graphs and figures. I'm sure you've already seen it. However, the details say inadequate support. The analysis conducted in the study are based on a new unvalidated metric. Well, first of all, the person who wrote this doesn't understand what the term metric is. There's a very mathematical definition of the term metric. We didn't use a metric. Look it up. Developed by the authors, for which they did not provide evidence showing it to be a reliable indicator of disease incidence. Again, first of all, we didn't study disease incidence. We studied the rate at which kids have to seek medical attention. However, we did show evidence in the paper, in the resource, in the peer-reviewed paper that was thoroughly peer-reviewed by 3 independent blinded peer reviewers, that the relative incidence of office visit measure is statistically more powerful than the use of incidence. Okay? So we're not even through the first paragraph here, and this is obviously incorrect. Potential bias may have also affected the diagnosis of illnesses in unvaccinated and vaccinated children, which is not accounted for in the study. So we'll get into whatever they mean by that. Let's get to it. The claim that they think that they are addressing is that, and this is probably from Children's Health Defense or something, vaccinated children appear to be significantly less healthy than the unvaccinated. All right, so the claim that vaccinated children are healthier, this is from their healthfeedback.org article. The claim that unvaccinated children are healthier than vaccinated children is common in vaccine skeptic and anti-vaccine circles. So I'm a research scientist, I'm objective. Both of my children are fully vaccinated. They're adults now. In addition to that, I'm just vaccine risk aware. That's the language now, and it's offensive to many, many people to use language other than the terms that they choose to call themselves. So please use vaccine risk aware. It's offensive to call someone a vaccine skeptic or anti-vaccine if they're not. And I'm not just talking for myself. The claim was recently revived on Facebook after like it ever went away. On Facebook after a study was published on 22 November 2020 in the International Journal of Environmental Research and Public Health. Articles were also published promoting the study, such as this one by Collective Evolution, thank you Collective Evolution, and this one by Children's Health Defense, a group that campaigns against vaccination. No, they campaign for science. I've never heard them campaign against vaccination. This is incorrect. Facebook fact checkers, this resource is a dubious resource, obviously. Both articles went viral on Facebook in early December 2020. These articles have received more than 11,000 interactions on Facebook, according to social media analytics tool CrowdTangle, while the study itself has received another 11,000 interactions. Actually, that is also incorrect. This is what the study has seen. We're coming up on 100,000 downloads, full paper downloads. So this article is wrong. Every other sentence of this article is incorrect and misleading. Several studies were cited to support this claim, two of which were also cited in the latest study published by the International Journal of Environmental Research and Public Health. One of them is a study by Mawson et al., published by 2017, which is replete with methodological errors and flawed statistical analysis, as detailed in this Snopes article. Snopes is not peer-reviewed. Healthfeedback.org is not peer-reviewed. They can write whatever they want. Our study is peer-reviewed. Facebook fact checkers. Everyone watching right now, make that point. Okay, because Facebook is relying on non-peer-reviewed articles to try to dampen the public's attention of our study. That's capricious and arbitrary. The other was published by a journalist. No, he's a scientist. Again, more misinformation. I can barely get through a single sentence without misinformation from this resource, healthfeedback.org. Dr. Neil Miller is a research scientist. And chemical engineer Brian Hooker, also a research scientist, which was also found to contain several methodological problems as covered in an early review of Health Feedback. Well, I think you know my opinion of Health Feedback now. It's not peer-reviewed. They can write whatever they want. It's just a blog, people. One of the most significant problems in the study by Hooker and Miller was its failure to account for differences in healthcare-seeking behavior between vaccinated and unvaccinated children. Vaccination status itself is associated with other factors that can influence health outcomes. And those other factors, I'm editorializing now, are associated with vaccination status. So what they're going after here is the potential confounders. Just because somebody can think of a potential confounder does not mean there's evidence of the confounder. And this is a serious problem in vaccine safety science. You can quote unquote debunk, any study by saying, oh, well, the people with, they had more cats, the vaccinated had more cats, or they had more M's in their first name. You can think of anything, and the farther you look, if you look at 1,000 potential confounders, you'll find one, and that's supposed to debunk every study. That's not how science works, people. That's not how science works, healthfeedback.org. That's not how science works, Facebook fact checkers. The potential confounders do not detract from any study because every single observational study, you can imagine some potential confounder. Anyway, vaccination status itself is associated with other factors that can influence health outcomes, but do not result from vaccination itself. For example, vaccinated children are more likely to see a doctor when they feel unwell compared to unvaccinated children for various reasons, such as socioeconomic status, accessibility to healthcare services, and possibly greater trust in health care professionals. So we have a peer-reviewed study that's based on data with an examination of electronic medical records that specifically look for the billed office visits, the ratio of billed office visits in vaccinated versus unvaccinated, not incidence, And we find more billed office visits. And because these people are putting these words on a blog, that means that all of the billed office visits are due to the fact that some people are less or more likely to take their patients to the doctor, are their kids to the doctor. Well, I know Dr. Paul, and Dr. Paul, obviously I'm a co-author with him, and he and I have talked about this. Most of the patients that come to his practice go there because he respects the federal law governing informed consent for human experimentation and the state law of Oregon, which requires pediatricians to respect choice. Dr. Paul's following the law. The public hears about it, and those people who do not want to vaccinate, they enter his practice. You can call it a selection bias, but it's not a bias where they're less likely to go see Dr. Paul. They respect him. He is a consummate healthcare professional. Okay. As a result, vaccinated children are much more likely to be diagnosed with medical conditions. Much more likely. They're making it up. I don't see any reference on that statement. I don't see any quantitation of it. How much more? 2 times, 3 times, 1.3 times? Much more likely to be diagnosed with medical conditions, even though they are not necessarily more likely to develop such conditions compared with unvaccinated children. Well, Facebook, are you going to fact check on the say that they're not necessarily more likely to be to develop such conditions? Not necessarily is grounds for putting this up as a problem? I'm sorry. We really have to have people who understand science. You should cite people who understand science, not these people. The November 2020 study was published by James Linesweiler, that's me, who wrongly claimed that the virus that causes COVID-19 contains a man-made sequence. Let's stop right there for a moment. I made this statement, a similar statement to it, when I was interviewed by Del Bigtree on the Highwire. I stated it as a hypothesis. I never claimed that there was a man-made sequence. That there was a laboratory, that the virus was laboratory made. What I claimed was that the data that I had in hand suggested that perhaps there was a P shuttle, SN element, in the coronavirus sequences that were published by the Chinese from Wuhan Institute for Virology. The clinical, not the sequence from the seafood market, the very first one. Now, finding that, this is really interesting. I stated that hypothesis along with 3 other hypotheses. I never claimed it. I said that it seemed to be most likely because I was surprised by the match, and the philosopher of science, Karl Popper, says that the degree to which you see something that you're not expecting affords a degree of corroboration. This is the philosophy of science. Facebook fact checkers, go read some Karl Popper. I was extremely surprised to see something that looked just like a P shuttle SN, so I stated the hypothesis. 2 days later, I went and within 2 days, I tested the hypothesis, coronavirus origins and anatomy of a scientific inference. I have published a good number of articles and put out a research report. I have communicated, there's Karl Popper. I outlined this 2 days later. I review for you the nature of hypothesis testing. It's a great example for the public and Facebook fact checkers to be able to understand how science is conducted. I tested the hypothesis. I falsified the hypothesis, and I issued a report stating that I falsified the hypothesis. So, yes, the study is published by James Linesweiler and Paul Thomas, a pediatrician who has spread vaccine misinformation without any citation, no proof, no evidence, just a statement on a blog. Facebook, you're using blogs to counter peer-reviewed information. Thomas's medical license was recently suspended by the Oregon Medical Board. No, again, more misinformation. They're leaving out a critical detail. The Oregon Medical Board held an emergency meeting after we published the study, specifically to retaliate against Paul Thomas for publishing this study. That's what we're up against. Thomas's medical license was recently suspended by the Oregon Medical Board on grounds that he breached, quote, the standard of care and placed, quote, the health and safety of many of his patients at serious risk of harm. Ladies and gentlemen, you are going to hear volumes in defense of Paul Thomas in the coming days and weeks. Volumes. The allegations made against him, I'm not going to say anything right now. You're just going to have to watch for it. Okay? We'll start a hashtag defend Paul Thomas. Let's do that. Okay, so the study examined the billing and medical records of 3,324 patients from Integrated Pediatrics, a clinic run by Thomas. That's Dr. Thomas. Of the 3,324 patients, 2,763 received 1 and 40 vaccines. Yes, they're variably vaccinated because he respects choice. Some take some take all, some take none. Okay. To determine if there was a difference in disease burden between unvaccinated and vaccinated children, the authors compared the children based on a new metric. Again, it's not a metric. Please have some people that are able to discuss analytics over this, but created for the study called Relative Incidence of Office Visits. Well, it turns out, if this resource bothered to read this study, the ratio of incidence of diagnosis is a special case of the relative incidence of office visits, and we say this in the peer-reviewed study because having one diagnosis on your medical record means you had at least one billed office visit. So it can be argued that this was not created. I just discovered that we're using a low-power statistic every time we simply use diagnosis. The relative incidence of office visit has a higher dynamic range, and again, we show in the study through simulation that it is more powerful. It is more powerful. That's a statistical term. Look it up. It means something. David Gorski, they cite, professor of surgery at Wayne State University. Oh, that's a typo. Professor of surgery, I believe they mean at Wayne State University, and editor of Science-Based Medicine, a blog, a non-peer-reviewed blog, explained the numerous problems with the author's approach in this article, particularly the use of RIOV, a metric that has not been shown by the authors to be a reliable proxy for disease incidence. We're not trying to create a proxy for disease incidence. I was interviewed by Dr. Andrew Wakefield, and he predicted that these people would not be able to understand what we did, and it's really clear that they don't. And I'm sorry for that. But here we go with David Gorski, professor of surgery. He's not a statistician. He's never published a single peer-reviewed study on pediatric vaccination. He's not a pediatrician who gives vaccinations. He spews his opinion onto the pages of his blog article, and when I prove him to be completely wrong scientifically, as I have done in my engagements in the past, he ends up throwing a hissy fit. And he starts, ad hominem name-calling and frothing at the mouth and whatever it is that David Gorski needs to get through his day. Okay, so this arbitrary random person who's on the internet doing a blog is Facebook's ultimate source for their concern over our study. He writes, they quote, the authors claim the RIOV, quoting us, reflects the total number of billed office visits per condition per group, reflecting the total disease burden on the group and the population that it represents. Well, we didn't claim that. We reported that. That's exactly what it is. But no good analysis or references are provided to show that RIOV does in fact correlate with disease burden, particularly when using billing data. No, our simulation shows that it's more powerful. Understand the difference. Doing matched analysis for patients with similar, quote, days of care, this is David Gorski, DOC, you're going to hear about this a lot in the future, in the practice, which is claimed to be, quote, unbiased, and he writes, at great peril, excuse me if I doubt this, given that there wasn't a really good demonstration that ... the choice of children with matched DOC was in fact unbiased. So let me stop right there for a moment, and I'll address this for the Facebook fact checkers. The process of matching is a very simple and straightforward procedure. Patients are lined up into two columns in a spreadsheet. You have your vaccinated ones here, the 2,700 164, and you have your 561s here, all de-identified. I don't know their names, don't know their address, anything like that. You go to the first of the 561 patients. You look at the days of care for that patient. And then you scan the list of the unvaccinated, completely de-identified. There's no other information. There's no information whatsoever about the number of vaccines that they've had, just that they're vaccinated. So take unvaccinated patient number 1, and then find the patient out of the 2,764 that have the closest number of days of care. And you match patient by patient that way. There's 561 patients versus 561 patients at the end. It is completely objective. And for David Gorski to make the claim that he doubts that that was an objective procedure is a form of defamation. And I've contacted a lawyer, and Dr. Gorski will be receiving, as well as healthfeedback.org, a cease and desist to stop maligning my character. I mean it. Stop it. I'm an objective research scientist. I pride myself on this. I am vaccine risk aware. That means that I am allowed to. I don't answer to a pharmaceutical company. I don't answer to a medical center that makes money off of vaccines. I am allowed to speak freely and operate scientifically in an objective manner without any threat to my career. We're going to hear a lot about this, I'm sure. Days of care, let me define it for you. The days of care represents the number of days that a patient has been seeing Dr. Paul in the practice. So we don't want people who have been there, who have few vaccines, to only have been there for 14 days. And because they're going to have fewer diagnoses. And we don't want patients that have a lot of vaccines to have been there for a long time, because they're going to have more diagnoses and they're going to have more vaccines. That would represent a spurious correlation. So any of the increased incidence, the RIOV, of office visits, okay, that survive the matching of days of care are particularly troublesome. It doesn't mean the other ones aren't real either, but they're particularly troublesome. Okay. So he thinks that, well, forgive me, excuse me if I doubt, given that there wasn't exactly a good demonstration that the choice of children with matched DOC was in fact unbiased. Yeah, it was unbiased, David. It doesn't change this, okay? If the primary outcome is a new unvalidated metric, oh, that's where they got the term metric. I'm sorry, it's David Gorski that doesn't understand a thing about data analysis. Got it. Sorry, health feedback, you probably better check your sources. Okay. If the primary outcome is a new unvalidated metric, it is incumbent upon the investigator to demonstrate its robustness. We did that. We did that with the simulation. It passed peer review. It's a result in the paper. So David Gorski is just talking out of his hat, as he usually does. Gorski also highlighted the possibility that Thomas's own views on vaccines affect the way that his practice approaches diagnoses of autism. Okay, Dr. Thomas believes that vaccines cause autism. That right there introduces unconscious bias that could affect how likely he and his staff are to investigate subtle signs of autism, and, in brackets, to refer out for evaluation based on vaccination status. No, that never happened, not once. Not once. There's never been a single incidence of a patient in Paul's practice where, because a child had some vaccination status, they were referred out for autism. Absolutely not. This is made up hokey BS. Okay, if it were true, it would be a selection bias, but it's made up hokey BS. Again, this is an important fact. This Dr. Gorski is imagining in his own mind what could possibly compromise our study, and because he's imagining it, and he put it on a non-peer-reviewed blog, Facebook and this health feedback org accepted it. They quoted it. Now Facebook is challenging our study. That doesn't even begin to merit a response, but I feel that I should respond, because part of what I like to do is educate people about what science really is. This is not science. This guy expressing his pedestrian comments have nothing to do with science. It's just an imagined problem and it's not a problem. All right, but nevertheless, let's continue to refer out for evaluation based on vaccination status and how likely he is to ascribe various diagnoses to unvaxxed children compared to vaxxed children. Well, Dr. Gorski knows nothing about the diagnosis of autism. One can easily imagine this bias. Well, yeah, we can imagine penguins flying through the air. We can imagine flying pigs. We can imagine unicorns. We can easily imagine anything. Imagination is not science. It takes lateral thinking, and it takes a degree of modicum of intelligence to be able to derive new statistical methodology and to be expert in machine learning and to understand statistical power. But imagination is easy. And this is what Gorski's rebuttal or whatever this is based on. One can easily imagine this bias leading to unvaccinated children being less likely to be given an autism diagnosis than vaccinated, or to be, dare I say, brought into the office as often for various conditions that Dr. Thomas attributes to vaccines. So in his imagination, he's imagining some reality that's on the ground, which is supposed to trump Dr. Paul Thomas's direct experience, which he has explained multiple times and will be explaining multiple times in interviews about what happens when he sees a child that has problems with vaccines and how he addresses them with the parents. I'm going to leave that to him. That's medical practice. I'm going to leave that to him. So find Paul's interviews. It has nothing to do with what Gorski is imagining. So whatever he's smoking up there in Michigan, whatever. Ironically, as Gorski pointed out, the study's table 7 demonstrates that vaccines work. Okay, were we talking about that? Okay, okay. You're going to dismiss all of the other results and cherry pick table 7, and you're going to accept it because we showed that there are larger numbers of vaccine-preventable diagnoses. They're not vaccine-preventable diseases. Vaccine-preventable diagnoses in vaccinated compared to unvaccinated. And again, Paul addresses the issues with the rotavirus patient that came into his practice with rotavirus and so on. And I'll leave that to Paul to talk about. So, yes, we showed that. Why did we show in a study that is ostensibly anti-vaccines that vaccines work? Vaccines reduce the severity of symptoms if they're a live attenuated vaccine, if they use a live attenuated virus. They don't necessarily prevent transmission. That is known, widely known. Peter Ubi and others have shown this, and there's more data coming on that. However, this article tries to place me in a camp of anti-vaccine and places Paul in a position of allegedly spreading vaccine information. Why would we possibly, why in the world, if we're anti-vaccine, why would we publish table 7? It's because we're not anti-vaccine. He vaccinates children, or did until his license was suspended. My children are vaccinated. So the casting dispersions on scientists for doing science in the United States is over. It ends with this study. It's done. You're not going to do this anymore. You can try, but it's not going to work. We have a bunch of things up our sleeve, including at the end of this broadcast, that will help bring an end to that. Several well-designed studies. Okay, so they're going to go on, and they're citing other studies, which I have analyzed all of them. I've analyzed all the published studies that address autism. See what they did. They're looking at other studies that allegedly address adverse events in children. I've addressed them and evaluated them. I'm not here to discuss that particular part of this article. I'll let them interpret other people's science however they want. However, what Gorski left out and what this resource left out, Facebook fact checkers, was that our analysis included incidence of diagnosis. It included odd ratios of incidence of diagnosis as well as RIOV. Okay, for comparison. In the power analysis, we showed that the RIOV is more powerful than incidence of diagnosis. In the data, we show significant with significant p-values, incidence of diagnosis. So the study has it all covered. If you don't like the RAOV, which we're introducing as a new methodology, then go ahead and talk about the incidence of diagnosis, because it's there too. So that's part of what I wanted to go over today on this. This is the health feedback. Now let's talk about health feedback. This is the website. First, I should do this. This is the study we're talking about. Relative incidence of office visits and cumulative rates of bill diagnosis along the axis of vaccination. I looked into the healthfeedback.org. I'm sure they're good scientists at what they do, but they list their experts. There's not a single member of healthfeedback.org that lists statistical data analysis or epidemiology, which is really simple analysis compared to what I can do, what I'm expert in. This person, Fiora Tio, is a microbiologist. She doesn't do vaccination. She's never published anything whatsoever. And I'm just pointing this out because, if they're going to call into question the results of a new method, then they had damn well better be able to evaluate the method technically. Okay? So if you are a scientist, a statistician, an epidemiologist, and you have much more numeracy than David Gorski, then I encourage you to look at it. In fact, I think that you'll find that you might be able to improve on it. It's a fascinating new way to look at the data. The number of billed office visits reflects exactly how many times a patient has to go to a doctor, and this for a particular diagnosis. Okay, so the health-seeking behavior itself is addressed in a number of ways here in the study, and that I wanted to share, if I can get this to. Okay, so I wanted to share the specific chart that demonstrates that the people who are participating, the kids that come to Paul's practice, actually make all their their well child visits, whether they're vaccinating or not vaccinating. So here's a figure from the study that shows the positive control in the study and the negative control in the study. The positive control being fever. The more vaccinated you are, you absolutely see an increased amount of fever in you have to go to the doctor for a billed diagnosis, for billed medical care related to fever, if you're in the upper percentiles of vaccinating compared to the unvaccinated. So what you're seeing here is the percentile of vaccine acceptance from 5 percentile up to 95 percentile. Each one of those bars is a ratio compared to the 561 unvaccinated for that percentile. It is completely uncontroversial and widely accepted and widely known that there is a causal relationship between vaccines and fever. So this is why this provides a positive control. This is unprecedented in vaccine safety science. The negative control is the well child visits, and you can see that even coming to the doctor for your well child visits is evenly distributed regardless of how many vaccines you take. So this is completely falsifies. We tested the hypothesis that Groski mentioned. We tested the idea that perhaps individuals have to come to the doctor more often. Individuals who are vaccinating are more likely to get a diagnosis just because they're at the doctor's office. I mean, doctors are not automatons who just accidentally, doctors and parents, the doctor-parent dyad is not just an automaton that accidentally gives a diagnosis because the kid happens to be in the doctor's office. What's happening is David Groski has no idea of the actual reality about what's going on in Dr. Paul's practice. None whatsoever. He has an imaginary scenario in his mind, and he uses the word itself. It's made up. He imagines. It's easy to imagine So, like I said, unicorns and leprechauns are easy to imagine. It doesn't make them real. This idea that you can have papers questioned to the point where they shouldn't be distributed, you can have papers retracted on the basis of the fact that somebody imagines that there might be a problem, is over. We're putting an end to this. Absolutely putting an end to it. First and foremost, we're going to stand up for Paul Thomas. This is how you do that. Go to the Freedom to Choose, at www.paulthomasmd.com. There's an FTC Freedom to Choose there. Find that, and you will find a way to help Paul with his legal fund. We are going to win. Whether he gets his license back or not is a separate matter. We are going to win. Understand that. Get behind the medical professional who made this particular data set possible. This study would not be possible if Paul did not follow the laws of Oregon and follow the federal laws governing human experiments and afforded the patients coming to his practice with informed consent. That's the fight that we're going to fight, and that's the fight that we're going to win. There are so many people involved in this. Get behind it, please. Go find freedomtochoose.org. Second, as a result of the rigorous peer review that brought about this study, highly rigorous peer review that brought about this study, okay, we now have, at IPAC, launched phase 2 of the Vaxxed versus Unvaxxed study. In phase 2, we are going to be looking at aluminum versus non-aluminum containing vaccines and look at the differential health outcomes and how many times kids have to go to the doctors. This is all within vaccinated. Number 2, we're going to look at live versus killed vaccines. Again, all within the vaccinated. And then because there was a back and forth with one of the peer reviewers, we did not measure temporal association of the relationships between percentile vaccine uptake and the risk of poor health outcomes in the study. And we couldn't, and that's fine, because that's not what our goal was. Our goal was to determine whether there was a relationship between vaccine uptake, a positive relationship between vaccine uptake and the number of times that kids have to go to seek medical care for the conditions that are suspected to be caused by the vaccines. So if we were to, the argument that we made was if we were to measure temporal association, all of the adverse events would have to happen. If there was no temporal association, all of the adverse events and the bad health would have to happen to these children before they got their first vaccine. So the nature of our study design, the question of temporal association is undefined, and that passed peer review. So that's why the paper's published. We had that discussion in peer review, and that's why the paper's published. Now, the next step that we're going to do in this phase 3 is to actually look for temporal associations. We're going to see for particular outcomes, are there temporal associations with specific vaccines and specific combinations of vaccines. And so I ask you to go to IPAKnowledge.org, become a monthly donor, find how to donate, and become an IPAC Science Hero. And let's drive this second phase forward. It's very important, especially given these criticisms that we have that, the vaccinated come to the office more often, blah, 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 all that, and therefore they're going to get more diagnoses. Well, the aluminum-containing vaccine people don't come to the office more often. I mean, than the non-aluminum containing vaccines. I mean, the 60% of the vaccines contain aluminum, so I guess 60% more. So we can adjust for that in the analysis, but no problem. It just modifies our null hypothesis on the expected rate. But live versus killed, there's a ratio of that in the exposure as well. So, looking at what the prior probability is, that's the technical term, we can actually do some real science here, like we have been doing. And Facebook, please stop telling people that there's a problem with the study, because 2 blog articles, one that cited another blog article, neither of which are peer-reviewed, express their opinion about our study. That's not how this works, Facebook. If you're going to be a legitimate social outlet for discussion, the free forum for the free exchange of ideas that Mark Zuckerberg said that he wants, then stop censoring people like us that are doing objective science, that put our stuff through rigorous peer review. David Gorski does not have the background to be able to understand our study, let alone critique it. That's abundantly clear. So I would absolutely encourage everyone to do the following. When you see Facebook put up a warning about this IPAC facts versus unfacts study or articles about that, that's the time when you should share that through messaging. You should share that link that they're warning about on other social media platforms. You should share it in Facebook groups. The fact is, you live in the United States of America or whatever country you live in, but I can speak about the United States of America. You have the right to freedom of expression. You absolutely have the right to freedom of expression. If Facebook is telling us that they're going to be telling us what we can say and what we can't say on Facebook, then it's fair enough for us to say, well, what other social media platforms are there? Right? I've stuck with Facebook. I'm probably on more Facebook groups and moderator of more Facebook groups than every human being on the planet. Right? If you're a health freedom group and I'm not yet the administrator or moderator of your group, please make me that. Because then I can share my stuff directly in your group as an administrator. I don't get in your political business. I don't get in your other convents and that kind of thing. I'm more than happy to share science and educate the public. This is the difference, the demarcation between science and non-science is in science, we submit our stuff for peer review. In blog articles, you express your opinion. Facebook, please use legitimate sources for your Facebook fact-checking. It's really important that you not allow these people to mislead the public on these important things. Those blogs are filled with misleading information. And our goal, ladies and gentlemen, our goal right now is to take this development right here, and we're going to change 100,000 into 1 million. That's our goal. There's 100,000 access statistics on this. Use this opportunity to better understand the study, download the study, read it yourself, make up your own mind, and share the study so that other people can take a look at it too. Share it to your pediatricians, share it to your school boards, share it everywhere. Download it, put hard copies in your pediatrician in the mail to all the pediatricians in your zip code. This is incredibly important that this science get out there. And if you're an academic and you don't like the fact that I'm talking to the public about this science, I'm translating science in so many ways for the public every day of my life. I teach online courses in biology. We're teaching statistics and analytics. We're teaching so much. I don't know what to say. I'm talking to the public because this is a matter of public health, and the government will never fund this. I'm talking to the public because corporations will never fund this, especially the ones whose income depends on vaccines. So watch for another episode of Unbreaking Science this afternoon. We have some really exciting guests. It'll be about 2:30 Eastern Standard Time. You're really going to love it. We're going to talk about the vaccine safety data link and how that should be made public. In the meantime, please enjoy the music on the way out. Thank you. Hi everyone, I'm your host, Dr. James Lyons Byler, aka Dr. Jack. In this episode, we're going to review the evidence that science is broken. This is not a true story.
The truth will be told, the people will know the price of corporate science really taking its toll. Whistleblowers blow, public health data low. They say the science is settled, but how do they know?
Science.
Ask questions, critically think, you should try it. It's pure, unadulterated science. Unbreaking science.
Unbreaking science.
You can't deny it. You sure can't buy it. Fact check, use your brain, don't be quiet. It's pure, unadulterated science. Unbreaking science.
Unbreaking science.
Using the tools of the trade to back up what we say. You can't be silent.